What's going on, everybody? Cleepus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be doing a quick comparison between the Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G 2023 and the Blue Bold N2. Now, as always, if you do end up wanting to learn more about either phone individually, be sure to check out the description, where I am linking to several other videos about them, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. So with the Moto G Stylus 5G 2023, we're getting a 6.6-inch 120Hz IPS LCD display with a 1080p resolution, a PPI of 399, and a 20:9 aspect ratio. With the Blue Bold N2, we're getting a 6.6-inch 120Hz AMOLED display. This phone also has a 1080p resolution, a PPI of 390, and a 19.5:9 aspect ratio. So in general, these displays are pretty much the same. The only real difference is that with the Blue Bold N2, this phone does have an AMOLED versus again an IPS LCD with the Moto G Stylus 5G. And this is going to give the Blue Bold N2 a bit of an advantage. With an AMOLED, the display in general is a bit brighter, the colors are more vivid, and the viewing angles are quite a bit better. So if you're outside in the sun, for example, or really in any kind of bright area, the Blue Bold N2 will be quite a bit easier to see. That being said though, on the other hand, one slight advantage the Moto G Stylus 5G has, and honestly it's not really that noticeable, but with this phone, with the 20:9 aspect ratio, versus again 19.5:9 with the Blue Bold N2, the Moto G Stylus 5G has a slightly taller and more narrow form factor, which can give you a better experience when you're consuming content. But in general, I feel like the Blue Bold N2 does have the edge here, because again, AMOLED displays tend to look a bit nicer. But of course, with a really nice 1080p resolution and a 120Hz refresh rate, the Moto G Stylus 5G definitely doesn't have a bad display here either. So honestly, you're really not going to go wrong either way here. Now for storage, both phones here have 256GB of internal storage, but with the Moto G Stylus 5G, this phone does have microSD card expansion, whereas unfortunately, the Blue Bold N2 doesn't. Now for a mid-range phone, this is definitely disappointing because aside from this phone, pretty much every other non-flagship phone does have microSD card expansion, and while with 256GB of internal storage, you probably don't really need it, it is definitely a nice option to have. And if maybe your current phone already has a microSD card, transferring the information onto a phone that doesn't support microSD card expansion is probably going to be a bit inconvenient. So if that is important to you, definitely keep this in mind. In addition to this, with the Moto G Stylus 5G, keep in mind that even though this phone in my hand, which is factory unlocked, does have 256GB, if you get this phone from a carrier, the storage could be different. But in general, for the purpose of this video, since I don't know which version of the Moto G Stylus 5G you might be getting, I am considering the internal storage here to be equal. So with that said, 256GB for the average user is plenty of storage. And even without microSD card expansion with the Blue Bold N2, unless you really want to use a microSD card that maybe you already have, you're really probably not going to have to worry about storage with this phone either. So either way, if you are looking for a mid-range device that has a ton of storage, either phone here will be a great choice. For security features, both phones have Face Unlock, and they both have fingerprint scanners too. With the Moto G Stylus 5G, it's right here on the power key, and with the Blue Bold N2, it's in the display. But starting with the Moto G Stylus, let's give them a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. And now for the Blue Bold N2. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see, both fingerprint scanners were real fast and responsive. And again, both phones have Face Unlock too. So if you want to use that instead, you always can. Now taking a look at the camera setups here, with the Moto G Stylus 5G, up front, we get a nice looking hole punch design for the selfie camera. This camera is 16 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a dual camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera and an 8 megapixel ultra wide camera that also doubles as a macro camera. So even though the typical mid-range phone has maybe 3 or 4 cameras, with the Moto G Stylus 5G, we're actually getting pretty much the same features, but it's condensed into 2. Not that it really makes a huge difference, but definitely cool to see. And then for video, with the Moto G Stylus 5G 2023, this phone can record 4K videos in the rear camera and then 1080p in the front. With the Blue Bold N2, up front, we got a 16 megapixel selfie camera as well. Then on the back, we got a quad camera setup, so definitely more of a classic design compared to the more minimalistic Moto G Stylus 5G. With this phone, we're getting a 64 megapixel main camera, a 5 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. And then for video, this phone can record 2K videos in the rear camera and then 1080p in the front. So in general, the features are pretty much the same. Again, the Moto G Stylus 5G, despite having a dual camera versus a quad camera with the Blue Bold N2, still does have an ultra-wide camera and a macro camera, and despite not having a dedicated depth sensing camera, it's basically just built into the main camera, so portrait mode does work perfectly fine. Now to give you an idea of what these cameras can do, first, here's some pictures taken with the Moto G Stylus 5G 2023. So overall, great quality here. And for the average user, for things people are typically using smartphone cameras for, sure, on one hand, if you're really into mobile photography, then you might be able to justify spending a bit more and getting like a flagship phone that obviously will have much better photo quality. But yeah, for the average user, I do think the photo quality we're getting here is going to be perfectly good enough for basically anything. So if you're using your phone for like Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, Facebook, whatever, the camera we're getting here will definitely get the job done. And then here's some pictures taken with the Blue Bold N2. And now the photos are right here, so when it comes to which one is better between the two, I'll let you decide that for yourself. But in general, for what it is, I do think the Blue Bold N2 has pretty good photo quality. So if you are looking for a nice camera for more casual use, but you do want to be able to take really nice photos when you need to, the Blue Bold N2 will get the job done just fine. And then again, when it comes to video, the Moto G Stylus 5G does have an advantage because again, although both phones can only record in 1080p in the selfie cameras, in the rear, the Moto G Stylus 5G can actually record 4K videos, whereas the Blue Bold N2 can only record in 2K. Now for the RAM and processor, with the Moto G Stylus 5G 2023, we're getting 6GB of RAM with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 6 Gen 1 processor. With the Blue Bold N2, we're getting 8GB of RAM with the MediaTek Dimensity 810. Now between the two, when it comes to performance, I would say there is a pretty noticeable difference. On one hand, neither phone is quite as fast as an actual flagship phone, which considering the Moto G Stylus 5G is going for like $399 and the Blue Bold N2 goes for $249. If that, I mean, this phone's been out for quite a while, so I'm sure you can find some pretty good deals. The point is, neither phone here is even close to $1,000, let alone $1,400 for something like an iPhone 14 Pro Max or a Samsung Galaxy S23 Ultra, so you can't really expect that much from them performance-wise, but I will say for what they are, both phones are decently fast. That being said though, between the two, the Moto G Stylus 5G is quite a bit faster, so if you're going to be on your phone a bit more, definitely keep this in mind. And also, in case you didn't know, despite not having it in the name, the Blue Bold N2 is also a 5G phone, so you won't have to worry about that either. Now I ran a benchmark test on each phone using Geekbench 6, and here are the results I got. So in general, as you can see between the two, the Moto G Stylus 5G has quite an advantage. Again, obviously not as much as if you were comparing the Blue Bold N2 to like an actual flagship phone or anything. But at the same time, the fact still remains, if you are going to be on your phone a bit more, maybe doing slightly more demanding activities like mobile gaming for example, overall you will get a better experience with the Moto G Stylus 5G. But I also want to point out for what it is, the Blue Bold N2 is definitely not a slow phone, and in my experience, I haven't had any performance issues. So if you're not really doing a ton on your phone and you really just need something for more basic activities like web browsing, social media, streaming content like videos and music, and more light activities like that, this phone will still get the job done just fine. For the batteries, with the Moto G Stylus 5G, we are getting a 5000 mAh battery that supports 20W fast charging, and with the Blue Bold N2, we're getting a 4200 mAh battery that supports 30W fast charging. So on one hand, the Blue Bold N2 does have much better fast charging, but really I feel like it's not that much of an advantage, since after all, the Moto G Stylus 5G is going to have significantly better battery life, and I mean Motorola's just have notoriously good battery life. So considering this, I feel like the difference in charging speed is really not that big a deal. And plus, with the Moto G Stylus 5G, 20W fast charging is at least decent. So in general, if the battery is more of a priority for you, the Moto G Stylus 5G will be a much better choice. That being said though, if you're not really that concerned about battery life, and you just need something decent, maybe you spend a lot of time around a charger anyway, then just keep in mind, despite not being nearly as good as the Moto G Stylus 5G, the battery life with the Blue Bold N2 is at least decent. So if the battery is not really a priority for you, it still should be okay. For the software, with the Moto G Stylus 5G, we are getting Android 13, whereas with the Blue Bold N2, unfortunately, this phone does only have Android 11, and with Blue's software support, I've honestly never seen a Blue phone get any kind of major updates. So with this device, you will basically be stuck with Android 11. Now, on one hand, for a lot of people, this is probably a deal breaker, because I imagine if you're getting a new phone, most people probably do want the latest version of Android at least. And while Motorola doesn't have the best software support, at least we are getting Android 13 here. But if you're really just looking for something basic that works and you just don't really care about the software anyway, then keep in mind, despite having a kind of outdated software at this point, the Blue Bold N2 still does run decently fine, so it gets the job done. So if that's all you're really looking for, it probably won't be too bad. When it comes to other features, unfortunately the Blue Bold N2 does not have NFC, but the Moto G Stylus 5G does, which actually makes it one of the few Moto G phones that does have NFC. So if you like to use tap and pay, then between the two, you will want to go with the Stylus 5G. In addition to this, obviously as the name implies, the Moto G Stylus 5G does have a stylus, and honestly, aside from maybe the TCL Stylus 5G if you're with Metro or T-Mobile, if you are looking for a phone that has a stylus and you don't want to spend a bunch of money on the Samsung Galaxy S23 Ultra, the Moto G Stylus 5G or maybe one of its predecessors is really your only option. so definitely keep this in mind too. Also, I do want to point out, this phone does have a headphone jack, whereas unfortunately the Blue Bold N2 doesn't, so definitely keep this in mind as well. But in conclusion, which of these phones is better? Now in general, despite the Blue Bold N2 honestly not really being a bad phone for what it is, in pretty much every way where there's a difference, the Moto G Stylus 5G is a better device. This phone does have microSD card expansion, whereas again the Blue Bold N2 doesn't, which gives it a bit of an advantage when it comes to storage. It can also record 4K videos in the rear camera, the performance is significantly faster, it has a better battery, newer software, and features like NFC and a stylus. Really the only advantage the Blue Bold N2 has is, again, this phone does have an AMOLED display, which does make the image quality look a bit nicer, but I feel like in the grand scheme of things, when it comes to the actual value you get for the money, the Moto G Stylus 5G is just a much better choice. That being said though, if you can find a really good deal on the Blue Bold N2, and you're really just looking for a device for more basic activities anyway, then again, this is really not a bad phone for what it is, and if your needs are really not that complex, it will probably at least get the job done. But this concludes my comparison between the Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G 2023 and the Blue Bold N2. Again, if you want to learn more about either phone individually, definitely check out the description, where I am linking to several other videos about them, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipis Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.